He was just an ordinary person at that time. And then about 2 to 3 weeks later, Vance, he came to my room one night and we were supposed to be going to baseball practice that night. And he said that he was quitting the team. He went on to say that he met some people and he was told by these people that he had to sell everything and quit the team. And he explained he was all in for Jesus now. And it just kind of progressed. He became more of a zombie by the day.
Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Hassan, and I'm here with Jeff Petricka, who I just met yesterday on the phone. And Jeff, you responded to a video that I did with John Collins, who's a ex third generation William Branham cult follower slash expert who has just an amazing library of information because he was deconstructing his whole growing up and belief system and writing books about it. And when I learned that Vance Boelter had been involved with a front group or an extension group of Branham, we got on the video, posted it, and then you left a comment, "Hey, I knew this guy in
Yep.
1985 when we were college students, and he was a nice guy. He was funny. We used to walk to baseball practice. So I'm gonna just ask you to reconstruct our conversation of like where were you? When did you meet Vance? And tell us a little bit about that, please.
Well, the first thing you should know, his last name it looks like it's supposed to be Bolter, but he pronounces it Belter, like belt, but
Dulter,
Belter. Yeah,
Belter.
yeah, that's how it's pronounced.
Thank
But
you for that correction because it's I've been saying it wrong.
well,
Belter.
not only you, but the media at large is too.
Okay, well that's
But
the
I
first
don't, you
correction.
can't blame them because that's the way it looks to be pronounced, but he pronounces it Belter. So,
Thank you for that.
but I met Vance, um, in 1985, it would be September of 1985 at St. Cloud State University. We were both freshmen. He was on the same floor with me, seven floor holds hall.
So that was like a dormitory housing
Dormitory
for
on
students.
campus. Yep.
Uh-huh.
Yep. So his room was right down from mine. And you met everybody on the floor, and Vance was one of them. And we both learned that we were going to try out for the baseball team. So he and I used to walk to baseball practice every night. And I went to lunch with him and we, you know, went to different classes that we may have had in common and that type of thing around campus. But he was a really nice, easygoing guy, really funny, just a ordinary 18-year-old guy.
Yeah, away from home probably for the
Yeah.
first time.
We
Like,
were all away from home, so we were all making friends and it was a new experience for all of us. So,
hmm
but he was just an ordinary person at that time. And then I want to say it was around 2 to 3 weeks later into our freshman year. And this is highly impressionable because of that first experience away from home and you're
Sure.
getting to know these people. Vance, he came to my room one night and we were supposed to be going to baseball practice that night and he said that he was quitting the team, which was odd, and I asked him why at first and he didn't really want to tell me at first, but he said he wanted to sell me his baseball bat, and I said sure, I'd buy it. And he sold, whatever I had. I think it was $5 for a $200 bat at the time, and in today's money it would probably be worth about $800. But anyway, he went on to say that he met some people and that he was going to move off campus at the end of the quarter, and he was told by these people that he had to sell everything and quit the team, and I was kind of confused at first, and he explained he was all in for Jesus now. You know,
Hmm.
these people told him, this is what he had to do. And it just kind of progressed, I want to say daily, like into he became more of a zombie by the day, I want to say after that. And he just couldn't, he just it was like a radical change in him.
Right. I want to just clarify because we
Yeah.
talked last night.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, last night you said he was a really good baseball player.
Yeah,
You
he was
felt
really good. He had an excellent chance to make the team. And all we did was, talk about what 18-year-olds talk at the time. We talked baseball, we talked girls, we talked,
hmm
school, that type of thing, parties. I don't know if I can't recall any parties that I went to him with, but, he was just one of the guys.
One of the guys. So my recollection from last night was you said that it was 3 months before he
He
dropped out
moved
of
out.
school and moved out. Okay.
Yeah, he moved out in November of that year, but he had his roommate from the same town. His name was Bob Schumacher,
Hmm.
and so Vance told me he was moving out at the end of November, and uh, so he had a open spot in that room, and I asked if I could have it, and I moved in with his roommate actually at the end of November, but from about I want to say the whole month of October through I want to say the third week of November of that year, that's the quarter.
Right.
Um, that's when, he went through, or I mean, he was just a different person at that point. He was just a radical um, religious zealot all of
Hmm.
a sudden, and he would not listen to anybody. We were all heathens to him all of a sudden. So it was kind of odd and weird, you know,
I bet.
that point of being just one of the guys going to baseball with him and, good player and, excellent chance to make the team and just going to this religious zealot. And I thought at the time, I profess faith in Jesus too, but he had none of that. He
Yeah.
was,
And last
I,
night you said he even said you were going to go to hell.
yes, he told the whole floor basically we were all going to hell.
And you
So
said last night you're a Catholic, but he
at
yeah,
that time I was Catholic,
yeah.
yes, and he no, that had nothing to do with his sect that he was
Hmm.
involved with. But the only way to heaven was through that sect, I guess. But he never, you know, going back to that time, and now that I'm a Christian, I mean, he never shared the gospel. He never asked me or other people on the floor to join him. Like come to one of our dinners because he was going to these dinners every night with these people off campus.
Hmm.
He wouldn't tell us who they were. It was just they were part of his newfound faith, but he never asked us to go.
Right. So as far as you know, he never used the name of the group.
No, he never used a name, so that's how I stumbled upon you guys.
Well,
Because I just had this speculation he joined a cult, just the way he was, and just that radical transformation where physically he would stare right through you,
mhm.
all this, and just like a zombie, like this, anything you said would bounce right off of him, and you couldn't convince him of anything else other than what, he was always right about everything and argumentative, very argumentative.
Hmm.
And after that point, in November, so I moved into his room with his old roommate from Sleepy Eye. They're both from Sleepy Eye, Minnesota.
Hmm.
And he never, I've never seen him again. He never came back to visit Bob. They were high school friends.
Right.
You'd think, just being freshmen, he'd come back and say, "Hey, how's it going?" or whatever. We never heard from him again. So, I just assume he dropped out because in 3.5 years of after that, I never ran into him. I never saw him at the lunch hall or the library or
Right.
just going to class. I mean, it's not the biggest campus, so you'd think you'd run into him here and there. I
Right.
never saw him again
But
after
he
that.
claimed to have graduated there. So for
Yes, and there's another.
researchers, we should look into whether or not he was just lying about.
Well, there's another clue to that.
Yeah.
On the news here last night, he went to Christ for the Nation school in 1988 to 89. He graduated from there, I guess.
So,
Well, that time frame does not work because in order, you know, we started in 85. I graduated in 89, and he would have graduated about the same time.
right.
So he couldn't have gone to both colleges. That Christ for the Nations was in Dallas, Texas.
Right. So I'll just say that one of my people, after the shooting, after the assassination happened, where he dressed up like a law enforcement official and had a car that looked like it was a police car, an unmarked car and such. But one of my people tracked down that old website where he said he was involved with Christ for the Nations. And I knew that to be connected to the William Branham cult, which is when I reached out to my friend John Collins. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, I have a whole thing on my website about Christ for the Nations." So we did that video. And what I want to just say for our listeners, William Branham was a fraud, and he claimed to get messages from God, and they recorded them on tapes. And this group now has reported some 2 million people worldwide that are still believing that he was a legitimate prophet of God, who was prophesying. But he seems to have morphed into New Apostolic Reformation. So he may have started there. And Branham was kind of the beginning of the whole Pentecostal latter rain movement that morphed into the New Apostolic Reformation. And how it differs from legitimate mainstream Christianity is there are self-professed prophets or apostles who say, "I speak to God." And
Mhm.
God told me Trump won the 2020 election. And if you listen to anything else, it's demons. The Democrats are demons and Satan, etc. So, but what I want to, challenge is the media has been saying he's just a conservative Christian who didn't like abortion, and just that isn't the real story.
No, and there are several biblical passages I looked up here in the last day where it says vengeance is God's, not yours. So and there's a specific one I wanted to read
Please,
from 1 Peter. It says, "Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult, but with blessing, because of this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing." So he says, do not pay evil with evil. And I mean, there's several biblical passages that says, do not take vengeance out on people that you think you're being persecuted by, or if he thought somehow these people were demons and whatnot. That's unbiblical what he
of
did.
course it
Why
is.
not?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
going back to that time, And, just thinking back at that interaction with him, and I told you this on the phone last night, is that, Christianity uh, is where the gospel is the power unto salvation, not a group,
Or a
not a
person
church,
claiming to be a prophet or an
or a
apostle.
prophet or a person. It's not that what, that's not Christianity. So it's the gospel, and he never shared that with me or anybody at that time. And then, to see him 40 years later, when I saw there was a Minnesota shooting, so I just went on the internet. I looked up his name. I mean, the name said Vance Belter, and I'm like, that can't be the same guy. I told you this on the phone last night. I mean, I would have expected him to be kind of like an activist, outspoken activist, like the Westboro Baptist nut jobs. Um,
Who are
you
blatantly homophobic and
Yeah,
such.
screaming obscenities to people outside abortion clinics and things like that. I would expect Vance to be like that, but not, a murderer. And I would probably say even before and after his transformation there, he'd been one of the least likely on the floor to commit this atrocity,
Yeah,
this horrible crime he committed. I would have said back then as an 18-year-old, no way Vance would, 40 years later, he'd have been the last person I would have picked that would
right,
have done that because he was so self-righteous and Pharisaic and legalistic. And, you know, he claimed to all of a sudden know the Bible. And if he knew the Bible, like I said, there's just several passages that says not to do what he did.
right.
And there's another facet to this.
Please.
So this cult, um, I'm not going to call them a Christian cult. They're just a cult that he
They're
joined.
they're 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 a cult that proclaim to speak for God
Speak
using
for
the
God,
Bible, but they're
but
not.
using the guise of Christianity.
Right,
Um, if it was Christianity, and your viewers should know this, a guy that says he's born again 40 years ago and he's going to follow Jesus, 40 years later, you become sanctified, which means that you grow in holiness, you grow as a Christian, and this whole like vengeance and revenge and all of that should have gone away a long, long time ago. Not
absolutely.
so this was at the forefront with him. And when I saw a video of him dancing around like a chicken on a stage in Congo, um, that just I just said he hasn't changed since 1985, or it's gotten worse, one or the other.
Hmm.
So
Right.
um, the media, like you said, had it kind of wrong in the beginning, like, trying to pin him on this or that. I even heard that they said he was a devout Catholic, and he was not anywhere near a devout Catholic.
Yeah,
So,
there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation floating
yeah,
around online.
yeah.
So I just want to comment for a minute and just say his recruitment was stereotypical from
Yeah,
my
I wanted to ask you about
experience.
that. That was a question I asked you last night. How does someone uh, transform that quickly? Like from about 3 weeks, like I said, it was about 3 weeks.
Right.
And you kind of explain, I think your viewers would like to hear how that works because you yourself were
Right.
recruited about the same way. So,
So when people go away to college, they're especially vulnerable. They're trying to figure out their identity, what do they believe, how do they fit in the world. And I was recruited at 19, but there's often deceptive recruitment and love bombing and come over for dinner, and they pump you for information about yourself. and he got recruited pre-internet, so we can't say that the cult had looked him up and
Right.
found out all of the details of knowing which buttons to push to recruit. But as a Moonie, I was taught how to identify hot buttons that would draw people to want to commit their lives to the group. And we thought Moon was 10 times greater than Jesus, that Jesus failed and should never have gone to the cross. We were told he was supposed to get married and have sinless children. And John the Baptist was supposed to be his first disciple. And all the Jews would march on Rome and take over Rome. And so the whole world would become God's. That was the Mooney BS
Yeah.
theology. But the point is that people don't knowingly join a cult. They get deceived, they get befriended, and there's a systematic breaking down of who you are and then indoctrinating you into their point of view. And part of it is this black and white, us versus them, good versus evil mentality. We're the chosen, everyone else is demons and
Right.
Satan, etc. And you have to die to your old life. And that's when you said they told him he has to give up baseball and drop out of school
And sell everything.
and sell everything. This is standard, religious cult practice. I was asked to throw out my poetry because that was my thing. He had baseball, but I had writing, poetry. They asked me to demonstrate my commitment to God, to throw out my poetry. And then isolate from family and friends. Don't talk to them because they're evil. And they probably said to him, "Don't try to recruit your friends. They're lost." Why? Because they were afraid you might get him back into reality. So
Right.
they didn't
We
they
tried, I had about a month. A lot of us tried talking to him and he wouldn't have anything of it.
well,
But
he would go back and report what was happening
right.
in the day, and they sized him up and they said, "You got to get out of there. Don't
Yeah.
try to don't try to talk to them. They're lost. They're
Right.
hopeless. They're
Right. We're
doomed."
all hopeless.
Yeah, they're
We're done.
doomed. And as I said to you last night, and I've said in my books and such, I was so brainwashed that I would have taken a bullet if I was told to, or I would have killed if I was told to, because I didn't look at people outside the group as legitimate. If we couldn't bring them in to save them, they were toast.
Right.
They did not have the right to exist. And Moon talked about infiltrating the US government and how democracy is satanic and how a theocracy needs to be set up and how we would amend the Constitution and kill people, make it a capital offense if people violated our rules. And as a brainwashed Moonie, I thought this was a great idea.
Hmm.
And once I got deprogrammed and learned about brainwashing, it was I was so ashamed, I was so embarrassed, but I was also so curious. How did they get me to believe this crap? And how
Right.
did they get
And
me to turn against my family and my friends and my country and my values?
you mentioned something last night too, which I think you should restate is I asked you, I said, on, just listening to his roommates, text messages that he sent saying that he made some bad choices and regretted and you stated something to the effect that you don't lose your former self.
Right. That's my experience is that it's a different thing if you're born into a mind control cult because you don't get a chance to grow and develop a sense of self
Right.
that's independent. You still have an authentic self, but it's more undeveloped, but you still have a sense of right and wrong and good and evil
Mhm.
and empathy and such. But what winds up happening is the pseudo self gets implanted on top of your real self and says, "This is your true self. This is what God wants." But you're
Mhm.
following humans. You're
Right.
following what humans say.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
one other point I want to make, if you don't mind, and that just is the danger when people believe that they can speak to God and get directions.
Right.
Because if they're raised and indoctrinated to believe that you can pray, and I used to pray over members as a Moonie, but
Mhm.
it would be audible prayers, but the prayers wouldn't be just like God bless us. It would be like telling God and telling the people what
This
God
is what
wanted.
God said.
This is what
Yeah.
God wants for you to
Yeah.
do. So it's really like
Yeah,
hypnotic
that
programming.
exactly. Yes. And that's why, it's important for every Christian out there to know is that God doesn't, there's no extra revelation outside of his word. So no one's getting these messages. No one's getting some extra revelation out there. So, God told me this yesterday or whatnot. That's all garbage.
Yeah, especially people who say, God said, put money on your credit card to tithe to me, and God will bless you tenfold.
Right.
And I
That's
need
all
to buy a
garbage.
third airplane.
Yes, that's all garbage. So it's always important to go back to his word
Yeah,
and discern. And I go back to the point that the gospel is the power unto salvation, not a person, not well, the person of Jesus Christ. That's the good news of the gospel. The gospel is the good news of Jesus. But if an organization or a person in your neighborhood says, that I'm the way to salvation or we are the way, so join us.
right.
Join our church. This is the only way you're going to go to heaven is if you join us. Well, that red flag should go straight up because
Especially if they say cut off your family, your friends, drop
you
out
need
of
to
your
cut
education.
and it's counterintuitive also because as a Christian your main task is to share the gospel. It's not your job to convert anybody. You're not going to convert anybody. It's God doing that work. So you sharing that your job is only to share the gospel. And if they're not doing that, that red flag should go up.
Yeah, great point.
And that's what I saw, with him, going back 40 years. I mean, that basically we were, like you said, all heathens. We were all going to hell. He had nothing to do with us.
Yeah,
And if this was an actual Christian community that he joined, he'd be coming up to our floor every day, going to every member on our floor that he met and was friends with, including myself, and just sharing the gospel with us.
right.
And
Exactly.
and not, you know, saying, I'm done with you guys. We're not gonna and there's nothing in God's word that says you need to quit the baseball team because
Right.
you know you
It's
you're
not satanic to play baseball
right.
and use your
Nothing, and
gifts.
and that's another point too. I mean, if he were to join, if he was, this was an actual Christian community that he joined, he would join the baseball team and then maybe share the gospel to the guys on the team.
Right.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
they would see how good a player he was, and that would be his end to, like, talk to him. It's
Yeah.
not this whole distance thing. We're gonna go to dinner. All we are Christians, and we're not gonna talk to anybody else but our community. That
Right.
type of.
Thank
And
you, Jeff, so much. We're going to be wrapping up now. I want to thank you, Jeff, for reaching out, watching our
thank you.
video, for doing this, and if there's anything that comes your way, other memories or connections,
And
I'm
that's
very
about it. Yeah, and I appreciate it, Steve. I was hesitant to even speak about this because it's kind of embarrassing, to know the guy 40 years ago like that. And then when I saw your podcast, though, and speaking about cults, and And I always suspected that. It just confirmed everything I thought
Right.
at that time. And that was 40 years ago. And then,
Yep.
and like you said, like the media, there's all rush to judgment on this and rush to judgment on that. And a lot of it's wrong. Some of it's right. Um,
Right.
and just cutting through all of that. So, and I appreciate, y- what you're doing to
Thank you.
help these people that are in these cults
Thank
and
you,
get
Jeff.
out of them. So I really appreciate that work you're doing.
Thank
So,
you, Jeff.
yep,
Take
thank you.
care. Okay.